Okay, now we will continue, and I would like to invite now George D. CHRYSSIDES. He is the Honorary Research Fellow at York St. John University and University of Birmingham. And George will present his paper entitled "Is Nothing Sacred? Jehovah's Witnesses and the Significance of Bible Lands."
Thank you. I think just to clarify on William Blake and the last night of the proms, the Jehovah's Witnesses wouldn't go along with that at all. I don't know if people know what happens on the last night of the proms in England, but it's a kind of popular classical music concert where people come along and wave Union Jacks and they sing Jerusalem, I believe. I haven't watched it recently, but the JWs wouldn't like that at all. It's too patriotic and it uses militaristic imagery, and I don't think you would. Yes, they wouldn't like that at all, I'm afraid. So anyway, I'm going to talk about something slightly different. I had thought of saying something about how Jehovah's Witnesses got a foothold in Palestine and Israel, but if people want more information about that, there is a forthcoming anthology from a past informed CESNUR Conference held in 2014. And the anthology is entitled Minority Religions in Europe and the Middle East. And I've got a chapter that talks about the history of the JW's progress in this country. But I'm going to talk about what they think of the sacred sites here, or some of them anyway, because I think a lot of religious believers think of Jerusalem and the Holy Land generally as a place of pilgrimage. It's a place where you can express your faith, you acquire merit perhaps in coming here, and there's sacred space. Those of you that are familiar with Mircea Eliade's writings will remember that he talked about this distinction between sacred and profane space. He said that space wasn't uniform. There are special places where you can get special sight or experience of the sacred. Now, try telling that to a Jehovah's Witness. I don't think they'd be terribly impressed. They also wouldn't be terribly impressed about making effort just to come to this country to look at sacred sites. Would it be self-improving? We tend to think of that as a feature of pilgrimage. Well, I'll say something about how they would see themselves improving in Israel. That will come towards the end of the presentation. And often pilgrimage is associated with special acts of devotion, perhaps special expectations. Sometimes people come to a sacred site expecting healing or expecting to find some kind of sacred relic. Interestingly, and perhaps some of the audience who are better acquainted with this country than me can put me right on this, but funnily enough, it doesn't seem to me that in Israel you get shrines that specifically offer healing. You get the places where Jesus is said to have healed, but I haven't found places where you can get healed. And sacred relics, they tend to be elsewhere. If you want to find the Holy Grail, you might try going to Glastonbury. But logically, you would think that if the Holy Grail is still around, it would be in this country. So I'm a bit puzzled by that, and maybe we can have some feedback on it during the conference. But the JWs have a problem about sacred space because for them, space is homogeneous. There aren't special places where you can find God. It's uniform. And if you've seen a Kingdom Hall, it looks like that. This is the Assembly Hall in Dudley, made out of an old cinema. And really, it looks almost like the place that we're in right now. There's nothing particularly sacred about it. just about the only clue you get that it's a religious building might be their year text. That was a previous year, the great day of Jehovah is near. So they'll put up a little text just to remind you of some particular inspirational passage in the Bible that they're to reflect on for the course of the year. But they have to acknowledge that there is something special about the Holy Land, because that's where it all happened. Being based on the Bible, virtually all of the events described in the Bible take place in and around Israel. Adam and Eve began in what is modern-day Iraq, not far off. Abraham starts his journeys in Ur of the Chaldees. Jacob and then Joseph take the Israelites into Egypt, where Moses leads them out of the Sinai Peninsula and almost makes it to the Promised Land, where Joshua takes over and leads them into Jericho. And then, as you probably know, David moves the people up to Jerusalem, and of course Jesus is said to have been born in Bethlehem. So in that sense, the country is special to Jehovah's Witnesses. The surroundings of the Holy Land are also relevant for the spread of false religion, because the other side of the story is that, of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses would claim to have the truth, whereas all other religions got it wrong. And that is the fault of Nimrod in particular, and what happened at the Tower of Babel, because from there, Nimrod establishes his kingdom, and then when the Tower of Babel falls, everyone gets spread all over the world with this false religion that he started. So both positively and negatively, the Holy Land and surroundings are important to the JWs. There are a number of issues about the sacred sites that one might think ought to worry Jehovah's Witnesses. The first is that most of the sacred sites here are actually owned by the exponents of false religion. It is the mainstream churches that own places like Gethsemane, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and so on. Those of you who know the country will know that most of the sites are of dubious authenticity. There are only one or two, I think, that we can be fairly certain of. I don't think the Jerusalem temple can be wrong. The Sea of Galilee hasn't moved very far since Jesus' time. But apart from that, as we heard yesterday, the sites are defined by Constantine's mother, the Crusaders, and I believe later the Ministry of Religion in this country had a hand in devising one or two other sites that we can't really be sure are the right ones. And these sites are also associated with pagan festivals. If you want to celebrate Easter, which the Jehovah's Witnesses have never ever done, you might try the Garden Tomb near the Damascus Gate. It's a shrine that is particularly associated with the resurrection. If you want to celebrate Jesus' birth, of course, as Eileen mentioned, there's the Church of the Nativity at Bethlehem. And was that really where Jesus was born? Eileen, you ought to have looked behind you when you were seeing that bit of the Church of the Nativity. The manger is actually there at your back. You should have looked round. Church of the Nativity. Sorry, Eileen is still jet-lagged, I fear. Don't worry, I'll explain it later.
Actually, when I was there, they were having a fight and throwing buns at each
Oh,
other.
right. But that's another thing that Jehovah's Witnesses object to, of course, the fact that there are these fights in the sacred shrines, like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The exponents of false religion don't get on with each other very well, and that does bother them too. And then, as I've mentioned, there aren't any special merits or benefits in visiting the Holy Land if you're a Jehovah's Witness. It's not like a Muslim going on the Hajj. You're just as good a JW if you stay at home, so long as you're doing your house-to-house visitation or staffing one of the literature stands. So, okay, I'll say one or two things about what they think of these problems. Does it bother them that the sacred sites are owned by mainstream churches? Well, perhaps strangely enough, the answer is no. They're quite willing, out of cultural interest, to visit cathedrals and other sacred places. These are one or two cathedrals worldwide. This is Milan Cathedral. They like this bit. I don't know if you can see it. It's got the tetragrammaton on top, and that is the sacred name Jehovah, which is very important to Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's good. What is not so good is when they put pagan imagery. Now this one is a tribute to the Trinity, so that's not so good. But it still wouldn't stop them visiting the shrine, so long as they are not in any way participating in false religion. That's okay. So the ownership of the shrines in the Holy Land is not a worry. They would be quite happy to come to them, to visit them, and they may or may not think that these are the real thing. So what about the dubious authenticity of the shrines? Well, there are one or two articles in past Watchtower publications about this, and they're quite prepared to say, well, okay, we're not sure about some of the places. In particular, on the Church of the Nativity, there is an interesting article in a Watchtower magazine that quotes this verse in John's Gospel. Some people said, doesn't Christ come from Galilee? Others said, he must be born in Bethlehem. Now, what they point out about that is that the Bible is quite clear that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but in this dialogue in John, they're actually arguing about the place of Jesus' birth. Therefore, they conclude that shows that even at the time of Jesus, people couldn't pinpoint an exact spot and say that's where he was born. So we can be even less certain now. It was somewhere in Bethlehem, but whether it was actually at the shrine of the Nativity, we don't know, and they're quite happy not to know about that. So they will come to the Holy Land, but accepting the dubious authenticity of the shrines. What about the rival sites? One of the features of certain places in Jerusalem is that the sites themselves can get contested. One famous example, I think, is the place of Jesus' death. Where was he put to death? Most Christians go for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that's the spot there. There's an altar if you've visited the church. But a lot of Protestants, perhaps it's because they got left out of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's not actually a Protestant part. So they came to their own conclusions about the burial and resurrection of Jesus. The garden tomb is supposedly, for mainstream Protestants, the place of Jesus' burial. And in the year 1842, a pilgrim to Jerusalem, Charles Gordon, believed that he had found the place of the crucifixion. And you can see it in this picture. It's right above the Arab bus station, Golgotha, the place of the skull. And what impressed him about the site, as some of you may know, is that the rock face looks a bit like a skull. That's the skull's teeth. You'll get it. But anyway, he said that that was the place where Jesus must have been put to death because it's outside the city wall and it seems to have the features that one might expect given the description in the Bible. So as far as Jehovah's Witnesses are concerned, they think that Charles Gordon's conclusions about the place are plausible. They say, well, yes, that does make sense. They're not so sure about the garden tomb. The reason being that they claim that that's actually an 8th century BCE tomb. We visited the garden tomb the other day, Margaret and I. They actually dispute that in the garden tomb. So I don't know how you date tombs, but the Jehovah's Witnesses are not impressed by that as the place of Jesus' burial. But they'll still visit. That's not a particular problem. Incidentally, the tombs in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they're not right for JW's either because they're two tombs adjacent. Joseph of Arimathea bought a special tomb into which Jesus is said to have been placed. So, why do Jehovah's Witnesses come to the Holy Land, those that do? One of the things you can learn about the Bible from visiting the Holy Land is the general topography. And you can draw certain conclusions from that, not just about where Jesus went and what the distances were, but if you take a concept like Armageddon, which Jehovah's Witnesses are very inclined to emphasize. Armageddon's only mentioned once in the Bible, by the way, but the Jehovah's Witnesses attach great importance, as you know, to it. Armageddon is said to occur, or be about to occur, in Megiddo. And that's Megiddo, that's what it looks like. I haven't actually been there, it's not my photograph. But there is a problem with Armageddon. Armageddon, Harmageddon means mountain. Now, that doesn't look very much like a mountain, as I think you'll agree. Megiddo is actually a plain. So what do you conclude by that? What they conclude is that Armageddon can't be a physical battle. It's a relatively small area. It's, I think, 28 miles by 14 or something like that. And it wouldn't be possible to get all the kings of the world and all their armies into that space to fight it out. So what do you conclude from that? Jehovah's Witnesses will conclude that therefore Armageddon can't be a physical battle, it must be a spiritual one. And it will be the spiritual battle between Christ, also known as the Archangel Michael, and Satan. So there was a recent article in Watchtower on this, and it's explained that it's not a literal place. And they also quote Jeremiah. Jeremiah doesn't explicitly mention Armageddon, but he is talking about a future disaster in which those slain by Jehovah in that day will be from one end of the earth clear to the other end. So it won't just be in the plain of Megiddo. The Holy Land was visited back in 1951 through to 52 by the third president of the society, Nathan Knorr. I believe James Tabor is going to say something about Charles Taze Russell, the founder leader, visiting the Holy Land. I'm going to mention Knorr because he was flown over the various sites, and he was taken over Jericho, Moab, Mount Seir by plane, and he was taken by car to the Shepherd's Fields outside Bethlehem and the Golden Gates. He went to Damascus. He wasn't very impressed by the window where Paul was lowered. He also saw Mount Moriah, and he learnt generally about the topography of the Holy Land. but he also learned one or two details that he thought typically corrected the mainstream Christian's understanding. For example, it's mainstream Christian belief that Christmas occurred on December the 25th. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses don't go along with that, and Nathan's trip confirmed his view. He said that the weather was far too cold at that time of year. You couldn't possibly have shepherds out minding sheep in the fields. So Nathan North saw his visit to the Holy Land as confirming things that the Watchtower Society had been teaching for many years. Now, just in the final section, what about pilgrimages that Jehovah's Witnesses might do? Well, funnily enough, I thought it was funnily enough, given that they don't typically believe in visiting holy sites, there are actually some dedicated Jehovah's Witnesses tour companies. There's Meander Tours and there's betheltours.org, who will take you or take Jehovah's Witnesses on visits to the Holy Land. I think I'm quite interested in going on some of their tours. I'll probably give a presentation somewhere or other on that when I do it. I think if you agree to behave yourself, you can get going on some of them. I'm going to find out about that. But you will notice that the tours aren't all to the Holy Land. This is a London and UK trip that they're offering. So where does that go? Well, one of the things they're keen to get people to do is to come to their Bethel. If you don't know what the Bethel means, it's a princery that is also residential. It's one of the few examples of community living in the Watchtower organisation. They're very keen that you should go. In the Mill Hill Bethel in London, there are scenes from the history of the Watchtower Society, and you can see how they produce their literature. And that's the nearest they come to doing a pilgrimage. But the trips don't just go to the Bethel, because you can do that yourself. You can just roll up and ask to be shown round. They also go to the British Museum, and there they will have one of their guys that will take you round. And these are some of the sample titles of their tours. God's Word is Truth. So the exhibits at the British Museum supposedly reinforce what they're teaching about the Bible and about the truth of the Christian scriptures. And then you can go to London by coach, where they talk about the rise of the seventh world power. The seventh world power, I can't go into all the theology of that in just a minute or so, but the seventh world power is Anglo-America. So you can actually learn something about their theology by looking at the nature of the United States and Britain. So the London walking tour, for example, again, I haven't been on it, but I think that this tells people about what the country of Britain stands for, what its problems are, and how the world is disunited, and how people need to learn the truth. And then I have asked what they do at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, and evidently that is about time, because time and dates are important to Jehovah's Witnesses. So these are the things that Jehovah's Witnesses find as inspiring as visiting the Holy Land. One satisfied customer described one of the tours, to quote, as a spiritual multivitamin. So they're obviously quite impressed by it. As far as sacred space is concerned, I mean, just going back to Eliada and the idea that his idea that space is not uniform, but in contrasting with the Jehovah's Witnesses' view that actually space is quite uniform, there aren't special places that are inspiring. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that all the earth is sacred space. It says that at the beginning of Psalm 24, all the earth belongs to Jehovah. It's not specially the Holy Land or Jerusalem or anywhere else. So there aren't special places. There are other things that are special. There is a special book, which of course is the Bible. There are special people being those who are in the truth, namely themselves. And there are extra special people, if you want to put it that way, the 144,000. So some people are more special than others. And there's also, and this would involve a totally different presentation, there is special time and sacred time. So one of their teachings, as I'm sure you know, is that the Bible is a chronological map of world events, starting from Adam and Eve, and then if you actually calculate the dates and the times, particularly in books like Daniel and Revelation, then you will come to the conclusion that the Messiah appeared in the year 29, that we ought to have expected his death, that the year 1914 is particularly significant, and of course that Armageddon is, as they put it, just round the corner. So these are the special things for Jehovah's Witnesses, not so much any special sacred place. And as Nathan Noor, the third president, put it, he said, in the near future, the reign of Christ the King will bring the establishment of pure, undefiled worship everywhere on earth, making necessary no pilgrimages here or bloody crusades to wrest one piece of ground from the grasp of its possessors. And he concluded, it was good to know this troubled area was being served by the devoted believers in Jehovah's service. Thanks.
Well, I think we have time for one question. Yes, please, Adam.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask, do they see the local branches, for instance, the one they have in Tel Aviv, as having any kind of sacred significance compared to the physical place itself, or not?
No, they don't, no. Actually, Jehovah's Witnesses map out their geography into various regions, and they, try to remember the name now, district office is not in Israel, it's actually in Italy. It's Italy that is overall responsible for that part of the world, including Israel. They have recently set up what they call an OTC. It's an overseas, I think the O stands for Translation Committee. But that's not because it's Israel. They're trying to localize the translation of their publications so that it's in proper idiomatic English or Hebrew or whatever language.